Welcome to Soul Key, your gateway to the unexplained. Step into a hidden world of mystical places, forgotten legends, and ancient secrets long buried in time. From cursed lands to ritual sites, from whispers in the forest to echoes of the unknown, each story is inspired by real myths, occult lore, and the shadows of forgotten history. Let the voice guide you. Let the story draw you in. Because here at Soul Key, some doors only open when you look at them. My name is Dr. Edmund Blackwood, and I am writing this account in the autumn of my life, some 43 years after the events I am about to describe. The medical journals would call what happened to me in Rome a nervous breakdown, a consequence of overwork and Mediterranean fever. The church might whisper of possession or divine punishment, but I know the truth, and I have carried it like a stone in my chest since October of 1884. I was 32 then, freshly appointed as assistant curator of Roman antiquities at the British Museum, sent to Rome to catalogue and acquire specimens from Monte Testaccio, that peculiar artificial hill in the Testaccio district, built entirely from the broken pottery of ancient Rome. 2 million amphorae, they estimated, accumulated over centuries of imperial commerce, their fragments forming a mount 60 feet high and half a mile in circumference. The locals called it Monte dei Cacchi, the Mount of Shards. To them, it was simply where their ancestors had dumped their trash. To me, it was an archaeological treasure trove, each broken vessel a glimpse into the commercial heart of the greatest empire the world had ever known. I arrived in Rome on the 1st of October, 1884, as the autumn rains were beginning to soften the Mediterranean heat. The city was changing rapidly under the new kingdom of Italy, ancient walls torn down for boulevards, medieval quarters raised for modern apartments. But Testaccio remained largely untouched, a working-class district of slaughterhouses and warehouses, presided over by that strange mountain of pottery shards. I took lodgings in a pensione near the Tiber, run by a widow named Signora Battaglia, whose husband had died in the wars of unification. She was a practical woman, but I noticed how she crossed herself whenever Monte Testaccio was mentioned, and how she insisted I carry a small iron nail in my pocket. Per la protezione, she would mutter, for protection. My work crew consisted of 6 local men, supervised by a foreman named Giuseppe Torretti, whose family had lived in Testaccio for generations. Giuseppe was skeptical of my academic purpose from the beginning. "Daughter," he said on our first morning, as we stood at the base of the mount watching the sunrise cast long shadows between the pottery shards, "my nonno told me stories about this place. Not good stories." I smiled indulgently. "What sort of stories, Giuseppe?" He kicked at a curved fragment of amphora handle. He said the Romans didn't just throw away broken pots here, they threw away other things that needed to stay buried. "Superstition," I replied, though something in his tone made me uneasy. "We're here to uncover history, not bury it." Giuseppe shrugged. "History has teeth, daughter. Sometimes it bites back." We began our excavation on the eastern slope, where recent rains had exposed a promising stratified section. The work was methodical, careful removal of accumulated earth and vegetation, cataloging of pottery fragments by type and period, searching for intact pieces or unusual finds. For the first week, everything proceeded normally. We uncovered beautiful examples of Dressel 20 amphorae from Baetica, their surfaces bearing the stamps of long-dead potters. Fragments of African oil jars revealed trade networks spanning continents. Each shard was cleaned, measured, sketched, and described in my field journal. But as we dug deeper, approaching levels that dated to the later empire, the character of the finds began to change. Mixed in with the commercial pottery were other fragments, coarser, rougher, bearing symbols I couldn't identify. Strange figurines appeared, crudely made and deliberately broken. And beneath it all, we began to find bones. At first, Giuseppe insisted they were simply animal bones from the nearby slaughterhouses, somehow mixed into the ancient deposits. But I had studied comparative anatomy at Cambridge. These bones were old, genuinely ancient, and they belonged to dogs. Hundreds of dogs, their skeletons carefully dismembered and scattered among the pottery. Romans sacrificed dogs, I told Giuseppe when he expressed concern. It was part of their religious practices, nothing unusual about finding them here. But even as I said it, I felt troubled. The bones weren't just scattered randomly. They had been arranged in patterns, spirals, crosses, complex geometric shapes that seemed to shift and writhe when viewed from different angles. And many of the skulls showed evidence of deliberate perforation, as if something had been driven through them with great force. On October 15th, we made the discovery that changed everything. I was working alone in the excavation pit. The crew had gone for their midday meal when my trowel struck something hard and metallic. Brushing away the accumulated earth, I exposed a bronze plaque, green with verdigris, but bearing a clearly readable Latin inscription. Hic IACNT, CANES, OCCATA, CUSTODS, PORTA, INFERUM, NOLI, DISTURBRI. Here lie the hounds of Hecate, guardians of the gate to the underworld. Do not disturb. Below the inscription was carved a symbol I had never seen before. A circle containing 3 interlocked spirals, each ending in what appeared to be a dog's head. The bronze was warm to the touch, despite being buried in cold earth. I was so absorbed in sketching the plaque that I didn't notice Giuseppe's return until his shadow fell across my work. "Mater di Dio," he whispered, then immediately began backing away from the pit. "Cover it up, daughter, cover it up now." "Don't be ridiculous," I said, though my hands were trembling as I continued to copy the inscription. "This is exactly the sort of find we hope to make, evidence of specific religious practices, clearly dated stratification." "That's not religion," Giuseppe interrupted, his voice tight with fear. "That's something else, something older." He refused to work for the rest of the day, and the next morning, 2 of my crew failed to appear. The remaining men worked in sullen silence, casting nervous glances at the bronze plaque I had carefully excavated and cleaned. That evening, I sat in my room at the Pensione, poring over my notes and sketches by lamplight. The inscription was clear enough, but the symbol beneath it defied classification. It appeared in none of my reference works, matched no known Roman religious iconography. Yet something about it seemed familiar, as if I had seen it before in dreams. I was interrupted by a soft knock at my door. Signora Battaglia entered, carrying a cup of wine and wearing an expression of deep concern. "Daughter," she said, setting the cup on my desk, "the neighbors, they are talking. They say you found something at the Monte, something that should have stayed buried. News travels fast in Testaccio, I observed." She nodded gravely. "Giuseppe's wife," she told her sister, who told the baker, who told everyone who buys bread. "They say you found the seal of the dog priests." "Dog priests?" I set down my pen. "I've never heard of such a thing." "Not Roman priests," she said, crossing herself. "Older, from before Rome was Rome, when this was just marsh and hills beside the river. My nonna told me the stories her nonna told her, about the priests who came from the east, who brought their 3-faced goddess and her black hounds." Despite my academic skepticism, I found myself leaning forward. "What sort of stories?" Signora Battaglia glanced at the window, as if ensuring we couldn't be overheard. "They say the priests chose this place because it was a thin place where the world of the living touches the world of the dead. They built a temple here, underground, and they kept their goddess's hounds to guard the entrance to her realm." "And what happened to these priests?" "The Romans came," she said simply. "They killed the priests, burned the temple, tried to forget what had been here. But you can't kill a goddess by killing her servants. You can only bury her deeper." She paused, studying my face. "They say the Romans threw their broken pottery here not just because it was convenient. They threw it here to keep something buried. All those fragments, all those layers, they're not just trash, daughter, they're a seal." After she left, I tried to return to my notes, but concentration proved impossible. Through my window, I could hear the sounds of Testaccio at night, the lowing of cattle in the slaughterhouse yards, the creaking of cart wheels on cobblestones, the distant sound of voices from the tavernas. But underneath it all, I began to detect something else. A low, rhythmic sound that might have been wind through the pottery shards or might have been something breathing. The next morning brought disturbing news. Another of my crew had failed to appear, not just absent, but missing entirely. His wife had come to Giuseppe in tears, saying her husband had left for work before dawn but never arrived at the site. A search of his usual routes revealed nothing. "We should stop the work," Giuseppe told me as we stood beside the excavation pit. "At least until Benedetto is found." But I was too close to a significant discovery to abandon it now. The bronze plaque was clearly marking something important, perhaps an intact burial, or even the remains of the temple Signora Battaglia had described. Archaeological opportunities like this came once in a lifetime. "We'll continue," I decided, "but we'll work in pairs. No one goes into the pit alone." Giuseppe's expression was grim, but he nodded. The remaining 4 men gathered their tools with obvious reluctance. As we worked that day, expanding the excavation around the bronze plaque, the finds became increasingly disturbing. More dog bones appeared, but these were different from the scattered remains we had found earlier. These were complete skeletons, carefully arranged in what could only be described as a ritual pattern. Each skeleton had been positioned to face outward from a central point, as if the dogs were guarding something. And through the skull of each skeleton, someone had driven a long, thin spike of black volcanic glass. "Obsidian," I murmured, carefully extracting one of the spikes for examination. "But not Roman work. This is much older." The obsidian was knapped with exquisite skill, formed into a needle-sharp point and polished to a mirror finish. Along its length ran carved symbols, not Latin, not Greek, not any script I recognized. As I held it up to the light, the symbols seemed to shift and flow like living things. Giuseppe had gone very pale. "Daughter, we should not touch those. Put it back." "Don't be superstitious," I said, though my own hands were trembling. "This is an archaeological find of enormous importance. These obsidian spikes predate the Roman occupation by centuries, possibly millennia." But as I spoke, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The obsidian spike was warm, not just from my handling, but genuinely warm, as if heated from within. And as I watched, a thin trickle of what appeared to be blood began to seep from the carved symbols. I dropped the spike in shock, and it shattered against the pottery fragments with a sound like screaming glass. Immediately, a low moan seemed to rise from the earth itself, and the dog skulls around us began to glow with a faint, phosphorescent light. "Run!" Giuseppe whispered. Then louder, "Run!" We scrambled out of the pit as the ground beneath us began to tremble. Behind us, I could hear a sound like digging, as if something was clawing its way up through the accumulated pottery fragments. By the time we reached the base of the Monte, the sound had changed to a rhythmic scratching, like claws on stone. That night, the dogs began to bark. It started just after sunset. A few stray dogs in the streets of Testaccio, then more, then what sounded like every dog in Rome. But it wasn't ordinary barking. This was a sound of summons, of answer, of recognition. And underneath it, barely audible but growing stronger, was the sound of digging. I stood at my window, watching the streets below fill with shadows that moved with too much purpose to be human. Cats fled. Rats disappeared into their holes. Even the hardy Roman pigeons abandoned their roosts and took flight in great, wheeling clouds. And in the distance, Monte Testaccio glowed with the same faint phosphorescence I had seen in the dog skulls. "They're coming back," Signora Battaglia said from behind me. I turned to find her standing in my doorway, fully dressed despite the late hour. "The hounds of the three-faced goddess! You broke the seal that held them." "That's impossible," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "What we found was archaeological evidence of ancient religious practices, nothing more." She stepped to the window beside me and pointed toward the Monte. "Then explain that." Against the phosphorescent glow, I could see shapes moving. large shapes the size of wolves but moving with deliberate intelligence. And they were spreading outward from the Monte, flowing through the streets of Testaccio like a dark tide. "They're looking for something," Signora Battaglia said quietly. "Or someone." As if in response to her words, the sound of scratching at my door made us both freeze. Slow, deliberate scratching, as if something with very large claws was testing the wood. The scratching moved around the frame, probing for weaknesses, then stopped. In the silence that followed, I could hear breathing on the other side of the door, deep, patient breathing that didn't sound quite like any animal I knew. "Iron," Signora Battaglia whispered urgently. "Do you have iron?" I fumbled in my pocket for the nail she had given me, holding it up with shaking hands. The breathing stopped immediately, followed by a low growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then, the sound of claws on cobblestones retreating down the hallway. "They can't cross iron," she explained. "Not the old iron forged in the proper way, but they're patient, they'll wait." "Wait for what?" "For you to come out. You're the one who broke the seal. You're the one they want." I spent the rest of the night barricaded in my room, gripping the iron nail and listening to the sounds outside. The barking continued until dawn, accompanied by other sounds I couldn't identify, scraping, howling, and something that might have been voices speaking in a language that predated Latin by millennia. When morning came, I ventured out to find Testaccio transformed. Windows were shuttered, doors barred, and the few people on the streets moved quickly and purposefully, clutching iron crosses and muttering prayers. The cobblestones were scored with claw marks, and several dogs lay dead in the gutters, not killed but apparently drained of life, their bodies withered and their eyes clouded white. Giuseppe was waiting for me at the excavation site, but he was not alone. With him stood an elderly priest in black robes, carrying a leather satchel and an expression of grim determination. "This is Padre Torretti," Giuseppe said. "My uncle, he knows about these things." The priest studied me with sharp, intelligent eyes. "You are the archaeologist who disturbed the seal." "I am conducting a legitimate scientific excavation," I replied, though the words sounded hollow even to me. "Science," the priest said with bitter humor. "Science that awakens things better left sleeping. Come, let me show you what your science has accomplished." He led me to the excavation pit, and I gasped at what I saw. The careful layers we had so methodically excavated were now torn open, as if something large and powerful had clawed its way up from below. The bronze plaque lay shattered, its ancient inscriptions scattered across the broken pottery. And at the center of the pit was a hole, a perfectly round opening that descended into absolute darkness. "The entrance to the temple," Padre Torretti said quietly. "Sealed for nearly 2,000 years until you provided the key." "What key?" I demanded. "I simply excavated an archaeological site." "You broke the obsidian spikes," he replied. "Each one was a nail holding the entrance shut. When you shattered them, you opened the way for the hounds to return." As if summoned by his words, a low howl echoed from the depths of the hole. It was answered by other howls from various directions. The hounds were still in the area, though invisible in the daylight. "Can the entrance be sealed again?" I asked. The priest examined the shattered bronze plaque, gathering the fragments with careful hands. "Perhaps, but it will require a price." "What sort of price?" He looked at me with eyes that held centuries of accumulated wisdom and sorrow. "The same price the Romans paid, blood and sacrifice. Someone must go down into the temple and offer themselves to the goddess to appease her anger at being disturbed." "That's barbaric," I protested. "Human sacrifice is—" "Not human," he interrupted. "The goddess doesn't want human blood. She wants the blood of dogs, always dogs, but not just any dogs." He paused, studying my face. "Dogs that have been touched by her power, dogs that have become something more than ordinary animals." It took me a moment to understand his meaning. "You're talking about the hounds that came out of the temple. They are part of her now," he confirmed. "If we can capture them, kill them properly, and offer their blood on her altar, the entrance can be sealed again. but it must be done before the new moon, or they will multiply beyond our ability to contain them. That gave us 3 days. The next morning, Padre Torretti returned with a small group of men I had never seen before. Quiet, serious men who carried ancient weapons and spoke in whispers. Giuseppe introduced them as members of a society that had existed in Testaccio for generations, keepers of the old knowledge and guardians against the old threats. Every neighborhood in Rome has such a group, Giuseppe explained. We are what remains of the priests who served here before Christianity came. We remember what the church has forgotten. They had brought nets woven with iron wire, spears tipped with iron points, and small clay vessels filled with a dark, viscous liquid that smelled of herbs and old blood. Holy water, Padre Torretti explained, seeing my expression. But not the kind used in Mass. This is older, made according to formulas that predate Christ by centuries. It will force the hounds to take physical form, make them vulnerable to iron. As darkness fell, we took our positions around Monte Testaccio. The plan was simple: use the holy water to manifest the hounds, then trap them with the iron nets and dispatch them with the spears. Their blood would be collected in consecrated vessels and taken down into the temple as an offering. It sounded straightforward. It was anything but. The hounds came with the darkness, materializing out of shadow and phosphorescent mist like creatures from a nightmare. They were the size of wolves but built differently, longer in the limb, with elongated skulls and teeth that gleamed like polished bone. Their eyes were pits of absolute darkness, and where their paws touched the ground, the very stones cracked and crumbled. The first charge nearly overwhelmed us. 3 hounds came at once, moving with supernatural speed and coordination. Giuseppe threw one of the clay vessels, shattering it against the lead hound's flank. The ancient holy water hissed and steamed, and suddenly the creature was solid, real, vulnerable. I thrust my spear forward, feeling the iron point pierce ethereal flesh that became solid at the moment of impact. The hound screamed, a sound like tearing metal, and collapsed, its dark blood pooling on the shattered pottery. But as it died, it seemed to look directly at me, and in its eyes I saw not just animal intelligence, but something older and far more knowing. It was trying to tell me something, trying to warn me of something I hadn't yet understood. The battle continued through the night. We killed 7 hounds in total, collecting their blood in the consecrated vessels as Padre Torretti chanted in a language that might have been Latin but sounded older, more primal. With each death, the phosphorescent glow from the Monte grew dimmer, and the scratching sounds from the temple entrance grew fainter. As dawn approached, we gathered at the edge of the excavation pit. The hole into the temple was still there, but it no longer seemed to breathe with malevolent life. The darkness within was simply darkness now, not the living shadow we had seen before. Now comes the most dangerous part, Padre Torretti said, taking up the vessels of hound blood. Someone must carry this down into the temple and pour it on the altar of the goddess. Only then will she accept the offering and allow the entrance to be sealed. I'll go, I said immediately. This is my responsibility. The priest shook his head. You are a foreigner, not bound to this place by blood or faith. The goddess will not accept an offering from your hands. Then who? I asked. Giuseppe stepped forward. I will go. My family has lived here for 10 generations. My blood is mixed with the soil of Testaccio. Before I could protest, he had taken the vessels and lowered himself into the hole. We played out a rope behind him, and for a few minutes we could hear his footsteps echoing in the depths. Then silence. An hour passed. Then 2. The sun climbed higher, and the normal sounds of Roman morning began to filter through the district. Church bells, cartwheels, vendors calling their wares. But from the hole came only silence. Giuseppe, I called down. Giuseppe, can you hear me? No response. Finally, against Padre Torretti's urgent protests, I tied the rope around my waist and descended into the temple. The shaft dropped about 30 feet through accumulated pottery fragments and earth, then opened into a chamber carved from the living rock. The walls were covered with frescoes that hurt to look at directly, Images of a three-faced goddess surrounded by hounds, of rituals involving sacrifice and transformation, of things that crawled up from deeper places in the earth. Giuseppe lay at the base of a stone altar, the blood vessels shattered around him. He was alive but unconscious, and his hair had gone completely white. The altar itself was carved with the same spiraling symbols I had seen on the bronze plaque, but these were older, cruder, cut into the stone by hands that predated Roman civilization. And standing beside the altar, translucent but clearly visible, was a woman. She was tall and pale, with long dark hair that moved as if underwater. Her face was beautiful but wrong somehow, the proportions subtly off, the features too sharp, the eyes too knowing. When she smiled, I saw that her teeth were like those of the hounds. "You have brought me a fine offering," she said, and her voice was like wind through broken glass. "7 of my children returned to me by iron and flame. I am pleased." "Are you Hecate?" I managed to ask. She laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "I am older than that name. I was here when this was swampland beside the river, when the first humans learned to make fire and wondered what prowled beyond its light. Your Romans gave me the name Hecate because it was easier than pronouncing my true name." "What do you want?" "What I have always wanted, to guard the threshold between life and death, light and shadow, known and unknown. Your people built their city on my sacred ground, threw their trash on my altar, tried to bury me under pottery and forgetfulness. But some things cannot be buried forever." She gestured to Giuseppe. This one understood. He offered himself willingly, knowing the price. His blood has sealed the bargain. "Is he dead?" "No, but changed. He will remember nothing of this when he wakes, but he will serve as my guardian in the world above. There must always be someone who remembers, someone who watches." She stepped closer, and I could smell grave earth and old bones. "As for you, disturber of seals, breaker of ancient bonds, you too have a choice. You can forget. I can take these memories from you, let you return to your museums and your cataloging, your safe academic world. Or you can remember and carry the knowledge of what truly lies buried beneath your civilization. And if I choose to remember, then you will spend the rest of your life knowing that the darkness is real, that there are things older than history lurking just beneath the surface of your modern world. You will see them in shadows, hear them in the wind, feel them watching from the spaces between what is known and what is feared. It is not an easy burden." I looked at Giuseppe, lying unconscious beside the altar with his white hair and peaceful expression. Then I looked back at the goddess. "I choose to remember." She smiled again, and this time her teeth looked almost human. "I thought you might. You have the hunger for truth, even when truth is terrible. Very well, but the entrance must still be sealed, and a guardian must still be chosen." "I'll be the guardian." "No," she said firmly. "You are not bound to this place. The guardian must be someone whose roots go deep in this soil, whose ancestors knew my name before Rome was born." She gestured to Giuseppe. "He has accepted the role. When he wakes, he will remember nothing of tonight, but he will feel compelled to watch over this place, to ensure that no one else disturbs what should remain buried. And the entrance will be sealed with his blood and mine, and with the promise that what lies below will remain below, as long as the guardian keeps faith." She moved to the altar and pressed her hands against the carved symbols. Light began to emanate from the stone, not the sickly phosphorescence of the hounds, but something cleaner, older, more primal. The walls of the chamber began to shake, and dust fell from the ceiling. "Go now," she said. "Take your guardian with you. When you reach the surface, the way will close behind you." I lifted Giuseppe over my shoulder. He weighed almost nothing, as if the ritual had drained something essential from him, and climbed the rope to the surface. Padre Torretti and the others hauled us up, and the moment my feet touched solid ground, the hole began to collapse. Within minutes, the excavation pit was filled with fallen earth and pottery fragments, as if our careful work had never existed. The bronze plaque was gone, the obsidian spikes vanished, even our tools and notes seemed to have been swallowed by the settling earth. Giuseppe woke 3 days later with no memory of the events in the temple. His hair remained white, and he seemed older somehow, more serious, but he returned to his work with renewed dedication. He took over as caretaker of Monte Testaccio, ensuring that no one else would attempt large-scale excavations in the area. I returned to London and my position at the British Museum, but I found it impossible to concentrate on academic work. Every pottery fragment seemed to hide darker purposes. Every ancient inscription hinted at knowledge better left undiscovered. I began to drink, then to wander at night through London's fog-shrouded streets, searching for something I couldn't name. Eventually, I was quietly retired from the museum. Too many missed lectures, too many rambling papers about the dangers of archaeological investigation, too many nights when colleagues found me in the Egyptian wing, staring at statues of jackal-headed gods and muttering about guardians and thresholds. I spent my remaining years traveling, researching, documenting the places where the ancient world still pressed against the modern. I found them everywhere. Sacred groves in Germany where trees had been planted to hide older stones, caves in Greece where Orthodox monasteries had been built over temples to darker gods, mounds in Ireland where farmers still left offerings to things they no longer named. And always, in these places, I found guardians. People like Giuseppe, often unaware of their true purpose, but compelled by dreams and instincts they couldn't explain to watch over sites where the boundary between worlds had worn thin. I am 91 years old now, and I know I have not much time left. Giuseppe died last winter, they say of a heart attack, but I suspect he simply completed his service and was released from his burden. Who will guard Monte Testaccio now? Who will ensure that curious archaeologists don't dig too deep, that ambitious developers don't build too close to the sacred ground? This is why I am writing this account, not as an academic paper or a confession, but as a warning. There are places in this world that should not be disturbed, knowledge that should not be pursued, seals that should not be broken. The darkness is real, and it is patient, and it remembers every slight, every invasion, every attempt to drag its secrets into the light. I can hear her sometimes in the small hours before dawn, when the boundary between sleeping and waking grows thin. She whispers of other temples, other guardians, other seals that are weakening as the modern world spreads its concrete and steel over the sacred places of the past. The hounds are still there, beneath Monte Testaccio, waiting, watching, ready to answer their mistress's call when the time comes for the ancient world to reclaim what was always theirs. Do not go to Rome seeking the truth of what I found there. Do not dig in the old places, do not break the old seals. Some knowledge is too dangerous for mortal minds, and some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The goddess remembers. The hounds remember, and now, God help me, so do I. This account was found among the papers of Dr. Edmund Blackwood, former assistant curator of Roman antiquities at the British Museum, following his death in November 1927. The document was sealed by his executor with instructions that it not be opened for 50 years. No official record exists of Dr. Blackwood's archaeological work in Rome, and the British Museum has no documentation of any expedition to Monte Testaccio in 1884. However, Italian municipal records show that several unexplained disappearances occurred in the Testaccio district during October of that year, and that work on the district's first gas lines was mysteriously abandoned after workers reported difficulties with the foundation excavations. Monte Testaccio remains largely unexcavated to this day, despite its obvious archaeological significance. Local residents continue to report unusual dog behavior in the area, particularly during the new moon. You've been listening to Soul Key, where the strange becomes story and the forgotten becomes unforgettable. If this tale stirred something in you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. New stories await every week, darker, deeper, and always one step beyond the veil. And remember, some doors only open when you look at them. Until next time, stay curious, stay haunted,